Organic evolution is a large-scale event that happens to populations. A population represents an enormous reservoir of genetic variation. It is the recombination of genes that continually creates new phenotypes. Though most variations within a species are barely perceptible, these exaggerated critters illustrate how natural selection acts as the arbiter of change, decreeing which members will go the route of extinction and which will survive and thrive. So the process of evolution involves splitting, where extinction, which may be long and lingering, goes hand in hand with improvement. Through branching, a new species sprouts from the bones of the old, so to speak. The eventual disappearance of old forms and the appearance of new ones constitute the heart of Darwin's thesis. In the tree of life, Darwin saw a pattern where new limbs arise as old ones drop off. In his words, there is grandeur to this view where higher animals directly follow. Ah, but here's the rub. Higher means improvement to the species. And how can higher forms arise from the same shop-worn genes endlessly reshuffled in the gene pool? Once again, Darwin's intuition proved unerring, though his choice of words somewhat unfortunate. It is his wondrous monster which ultimately brings vigor to a population, though in real life it is very rarely this exaggerated. His wondrous monster symbolizes what we now call a mutation. Today we recognize two sources of variation: meiosis, which reshuffles the existing genes, and mutation, which is the more fundamental, because it is the prime source of variation. It is mutation that injects novelty into the population. To understand how mutation affects evolution, we must delve into the molecular world. The sequence of bases along the strand of DNA constitutes the genetic code. In a complex process called protein synthesis, the code sequence is transferred to a messenger molecule. The code is then transported to a miniature protein factory, the ribosome, where a specific amino acid is fetched in the order prescribed by the code. In this way, amino acids are linked in proper sequence to produce a protein such as insulin. These proteins, manufactured by the cell's machinery, are the very stuff of life, determining both the form and function of the organism. So the DNA code is the essence of life. But how can the DNA molecule undergo alteration? Shortwave ionizing radiation can strip electrons from atoms, thereby creating ions. A trail of ions in turn can form chemically active compounds, such as superoxides, which may ultimately alter DNA molecules. Another agent of mutation, long ultraviolet waves, are capable of breaking DNA strands. Finally, there are chemicals that can mimic DNA bases. A single change to a DNA molecule might produce a missing amino acid in a protein and render the cell dysfunctional. Of all the billions of DNA molecules in a complex organism, only those in the DNA of the sex cell need concern us. If in a gamete a change occurs in a base sequence, this change may enter the gene pool of a population as new information. When the change is passed on, it is called a mutation. A mutation then is a change to a gene that is inheritable. Are mutations ultimately beneficial or harmful? A mutant gene is beneficial if it gives the offspring some adaptive advantage. A mutant gene is harmful if it places a critter at a disadvantage. In the course of events, mutation is generally subtle because large and radical genetic change tends to be fatal to the organism. For example, a whole sequence of proteins may be necessary to build one essential chemical. If a genetic change alters only one protein, a vital chain of events may be interrupted and the organism rendered incapable of survival. Not surprisingly, many biologists have asserted that mutations affecting the ability of the gene to code for proteins are tiny changes that take place at a relatively slow, steady rate. But there is no hotter debate in the field of evolution today than the whole question of the rate of mutation and the rate of evolution. Take, for example, two mammals, the mouse and the elephant. If the agents of mutation bombard both species at the same rate, because there are more generations of mice than elephants, shouldn't the mice evolve at a faster rate? Another puzzling point. If slow and steady wins the race, why does evolution proceed more quickly in large-brained mammals than small-brained reptiles? Could the brain be speeding up the rate of evolution? And if the brain is superseding the role of natural selection, does its function threaten Darwinism? Certainly, if one word summarizes the rate of evolution, according to Darwin, it is gradualism. Darwin was convinced that evolution involved the accumulation of tiny, advantageous modifications. When the fossil records indicated a gap, Darwin was certain that the paleontological records were imperfect. The most recent challenge to Darwin is the theory of punctuated equilibrium. The gist of this theory is that species remain stable for long periods of time, only to suddenly evolve. According to this theory, the rocks tell the truth. There is no gap in the records. In a relatively short burst of time, measured in thousands of years, a species undergoes a major change and settles back into a long period of stability. Here is a comparison of the two patterns, gradualism and punctuated equilibrium. The one is smooth, the other shows leaps and bounds. Now squint. Their branching patterns look much alike. The theory of punctuated equilibrium then hardly spoils the luster of Darwin's vision. The final chapter is far from written. In Darwin's words, a grand and untrodden field of inquiry will be opened, where from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful, have been and are being evolved.